Okay, so here's a nice little GCSE exam question. Quite straightforward if you understand your algebra, and worth, I think, 4 marks if you not only got the right answer but also followed a good method. Okay, so before we complete this, though, we're going to have a look at the examiner's remarks, and I'm afraid to say the examiner's remarks are rather negative. So this was poorly tackled by a lot of candidates, and it shows the problems that people have with algebra. So examiner's remarks read like this. This question highlighted poor algebraic techniques. These, combined with difficulties dealing with positive and negative signs, meant that many poor responses were seen. Now then they list common errors. So common errors were x squared subtract 4x plus 4x, which is something we're going to come across. Well, the minus 4x and the plus 4x should have cancelled, but instead people somehow added them together to get minus 8x. So that was one problem. There was a problem with multiplying out these brackets here. Can you see x times x minus 4? So we should have distributed the x across both of these to get x squared minus 4x. The answers often seen were x squared minus 4. So the x wasn't distributed across both terms, or they had negative 4x squared, so combining those terms somehow, not realizing that they weren't like terms. Also at the end of the calculation we have this thing going on with 10x. We'll see that in a moment, so that's towards the end of the calculation. So there were errors towards the end. So candidates, they say, often wrote down 2 correct algebraic expressions, but then they made no further progress. Some candidates tried to multiply the expressions rather than add them, so they didn't realize it was about addition, or they didn't understand how to do addition, even though a numerical example was given at the start. And a small proportion of attempts used trial and error, but these were often unsuccessful, so not recommended. Candidates who chose a number greater than 4 had more success, but those who chose a number less than 4 because of the negative number aspect, but there were very few correct solutions here. And then finally, some candidates, having used correct algebra to obtain 10x, so this is this process at the end, then they got it wrong at the end. They gave a different value for k. So what we'll do is we'll get rid of that, and I'm going to show you how, well, a good way of tackling it. And I suppose the idea here is not only to work ourselves successfully through the steps, but avoid making these common errors, or avoid slipping up at various stages, so that it's a complete solution and we get all 4 marks. So let's start, and we start with planning. We start by reading the question carefully and thinking strategically about what we're going to do. So here they say is an addition pyramid. So we can see we've got 2 plus 4 giving us 6, and 4 plus 5 giving us 9. And then we've got 6 plus 9 giving us 15. Each number is the sum of the 2 numbers below it. Okay? Here they say is an algebraic addition pyramid. So working in the same way, but this time with algebraic expressions. So again, we have our numbers at the bottom, or our expressions in this case, and we're then going to add to get to these bricks, and then add those to get to the top. And then we have to work out the value of k. So we're going to think about this in 2 stages. If we go back to this one at the top, we had first the adding of the 2 plus the 4 to get the 6. So here we've got stage 1, if you like, adding the 2 plus the 4 to get the 6. And then we've got stage 2, adding the 4 plus the 5 in this case to get the 9. And finally, a third step, so we'll put 3 here, to get to the 15, so adding the 6 and the 9. Now if we apply the same principle here, we're going to start with x times x to the x minus 4, plus the 4x to get us to this brick here. So that's going to be our first step. But before we do that, and this was highlighted in the misconceptions that the examiners remarked on, we need to do something to this term here. we need to multiply out the brackets. So our very first operation is going to be multiplying out the brackets. So let's do that right now. Let's do that first. Okay, so let's mark that A and write out the problem. We've got x times x minus 4, and we want to remove those brackets, so we're going to get an x squared term and an x term. In other words, we multiply, we distribute that x across both terms. So first of all, we multiply it by the x, and then we're going to multiply it by the negative 4. So x times x, x squared. X times negative 4, negative 4x. So our expression now is x squared minus 4x. Okay, so that's rewritten this term here, and now we can proceed to add these two expressions together. So b, if we write now our rearranged form, x squared minus 4x, plus now the 4x in the second brick along, we ought to be able to see that we've got a negative 4x and a positive 4x, and by the zero principle those cancel each other out. In other words, negative 4x plus 4x equals 0. Or you could commute it, rearrange it and say 4x minus 4x, 0. Either way, they cancel and leave us simply with x squared. Okay, so that was let's write that here, step 1 of our procedure. Now we're going to move to step 2. So we're now going to add these two bricks. So we have 4x plus 6x minus x squared. Okay, now we can we simplify, in fact, the whole expression, so we gather up like terms. So here we say, well, what x squared terms have we got first? Because that's the highest power. Well, we've just got one. We've got this one here. It's negative x squared. Nothing to add or subtract from it. So we simply write that down, negative x squared. Let's just erase that underline. Okay. Then we gather up the x terms. So we have plus 4x plus 6x, in other words, plus 10x. And that's completed step 2. So step 1 got us to here. Step 2 got us to here. I'll just mark those clearly. Now we've got to add the result from step 1 to the result from step 2. So now let's call this C. So now we've got x squared, which we got from step 1 there, minus x squared plus 10x. So again, using the zero principle, the x squared minus the x squared cancel those x squared terms, and we're simply left with 10x. Now, this apparently quite a few people got this far, but now we reach the stage that people often faltered at. What have we got to do? We've got to the top brick, so we now know that kx equals 10x. Okay, we'll just write that in. That gives us an equation, and we'll write it here. Kx equals 10x. How are we going to find out the value of k? Well, we've got an x on both sides. If we want to get rid of that x, we can divide by x, which will leave us just with 1. 1 times k is just k. And we can do the same to that side as well. Divide through by x, so we have to do the same to the left and right side of an equation. So we end up with k, if I write it out in full, you can see it working. K divided by x equals 10x divided by x. So now x divided by x is just 1, x divided by x is 1. In other words, k equals 10. So work out the value of k. Well, we've done that, so we should have got our 4 marks. Okay.